So, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of Toronto Maple Leaf fans know this already. The Maple Leafs had a breakthrough in the mid-1970s, 77 playoffs, 76, 77, 78, and 79. They were making it past the first round preliminaries, but weren't winning the quarterfinal round until they knocked off the Islanders in 78. They got to the Frozen Four against the Canadiens, lost. But if you really, really look at it, if Toronto's management would have held positivity in place, and if Ballard and everybody else would have taken a big look, that 75 Cup would have been theirs. And you're saying to yourself, what are you talking about? Well, if you do a little bit of Toronto Maple Leaf history, going back to the draft picks of the 60s and players they gave up on in the early 70s, it really stands out that they could have had one of the best franchises in Canadian hockey history. Not in U.S. hockey history, but Canadian hockey history. Bear with me for a second. So, you know, they talk about fantasy league and stuff like that. This is a 1975 fantasy team dealing with the draft picks of that year with players that may have not been moved if they would have stayed. Players that would have given more where not Ballard would have forced them out to the WHA. We're not going to talk about Frank Mahovlich coming back to the Maple Leafs, but something very similar. Again, bear with me. So this is a fantasy roster through my own memory of what the Maple Leafs did. Now, in 75, if you would have kept Pat with some of these players, this is the team you would have. In net, ladies and gentlemen, Bernie Parent, Jerry Cheevers, and Mike Palmateer. Palmateer was just drafted. Cheevers was drafted, but Boston took him over, and Toronto let Parent go in pretty well the early 70s. Now, because of the players that jumped to the WHA, they lost a whole line. Now, this and the Rick Kehoe trade was just terrible. So you can imagine this. These are 5 lines, ladies and gentlemen. And the other line could be substitute. Normie Ullman, Rick Kehoe, Daryl Sittler. Paul Anderson, Rennie Robert, Dave Keon. Tiger Williams, Errol Thompson, Cowboy Bill Flett. Lanny McDonald, Gary Unger, Inga Hammerstrom. And with the filler line with Ron Ellis, George Ferguson, or Brian Spencer, or Bruce Boudreau if you would have drafted him a year early. Can you imagine, ladies and gentlemen, that team suiting up in 1975? They would have swept the Kings. They would have defeated the Flyers. They would have eventually probably gone on to win the Cup. So just repeat this again. Just sink in. Normie Ullman, Rick Kehoe, Daryl Sittler, Paul Anderson, Rennie Robert, Dave Keon, Tiger Williams, Errol Thompson, Cowboy Bill Flett, Lanny McDonald, Gary Unger, Inga Hammerstrom, Ron Ellis, George Ferguson, or Brian Spencer, and Bruce Boudreau. Now on defense, I'm keeping it to 6. Bear with me because you're going to be shocked by this. Boyer Solomon, Bob Neely, Rod Sealing, good defensive player, Brian Glennie, Ian Turnbull, and Jim McKinney. 6 players that were good on defense and they were on offense. So ladies and gentlemen, just think if this lineup would have taken the ice for most of the 1975 season. All the Montreal Cups later on may have not occurred. But the problem is Toronto forced a lot of these players out of town. Bernie Parent, Cheevers, Normie Ullman, Rick Kehoe was traded. Paul Henderson was let go to WHA. Rennie Robert skipped town, went to Pittsburgh. Dave Keon jumped to WHA. He didn't keep Errol Thompson long enough. Gary Unger ended up with the Detroit system. And Spencer was let go to New York Islanders. You should have kept him in the expansion draft. And you should have drafted Bruce Boudreau a year earlier. He would have been a good 5th liner. Boyer Solomon was just new to the club. Bob Neely was effective. Rod Sealing had the international and defensive experience. Brian Glennie was an underrated defenseman. Ian Turnbull was a scoring machine. And Jim McKinney was good. Jim McKinney was good for between 25 and 50 points a season on defense, good in the power play. So if you're salivating Toronto Maple Leaf fans, please do not blame me. Blame Harold Ballard for not only giving you, he gave you hamburger, not steak, for the 75 season. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Just re-listen to this podcast to remind yourself how good Toronto could have been. Have a good one. Bye.